That is good.
Really, not torrential.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the Rules Committee. Today, the Rules Committee will consider H.R. 1873, the Electricity Reliability and Force Protection Act, and H.R. 1654, the Water Supply Permitting Coordination Act. The regulatory process of constructing new surface water storage, whether federally or non-federally owned, often involves a host of federal, state, and local issues, and the permitting that goes along with that, and approval also from various agencies. Throughout this process, federal agencies are not required to coordinate their permits and approvals with others. As a result, conflicting agency permit requirements add time to the project planning and implementation process, and of course, we'd all know, and increases the potential for last-minute surprises, delays, and costs that could endanger the success of important water projects that require additional work. H.R. 1654 addresses this dysfunction by creating a one-stop shop permitting processes through the Bureau of Reclamation to streamline the current multi-agency permitting processes for new or expanded non-federal surface storage facilities. Rules Committee will also consider H.R. 1873, legislation that amends the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976 to enhance the reliability of the electricity grid and to reduce the threat of wildfires to and from electric transmissions and distribution facilities on federal lands by facilitating vegetation management. Existing regulations and red tape on federal lands currently make it extremely difficult for utility companies to remove hazardous vegetation or trees that have the potential of falling or have fallen on power lines and causing a blackout or, even worse yet, a forest fire. The Forest Service reported 113 and 232 wildfires caused by contact between The Forest Service reported 113 and 232 wildfires. 2 different years. Thank you very much. The expert witness is here. I do know how to read, but I could not complete the sentence properly, and I please appreciate the gentleman from California offering his expert witness to me. Between power lines and trees on lands in 2013, there you go, in 2012, respectively. This legislation will help this circumstance. I'd like to welcome people who are on the front lines of these issues, these problems, and these answers. The gentleman, Mr. McClintock, Tom McClintock, is from Northern California, and the gentleman, Mr. Lamalfa, from Central Northern California. You got to be from way up north to call it north in Texas. So we're going to call that the same. To be our first panel, we're delighted that both of you are here. Look, I know it's summertime, and a lot of these issues are directly in our midst. We can see them on the news, we can see them in hearing from our colleagues, and more specifically, we can hear them because they're important. The West is important to the United States of America. Obviously, we appreciate your tremendous work on these issues. Without objection, anything you bring in writing will be into the record. I'm delighted that both of you are here. However, before we get to you, we're going to move to the ranking member, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I welcome our witnesses, and I agree with you that the West is important, but let's not forget about the South on these same issues. Thank you very kindly, sir.
Yes, sir. And Judge, I don't need to remind you that evidently a hurricane is headed to the Gulf as we speak. It's evidently headed more towards Texas and Louisiana, but I don't need to tell you that you know this, that your beautiful home state resides in that same Gulf and will probably have something there. So the gentleman knows that his ideas at this committee are welcome also, and I thank you. Thank you very much. So here we go. Quite honestly, gentlemen, as I began to study up on this issue, it reminded me of really the circumstances that beset your state day after day, year after year, and I want to thank you both, not only for being here with a better answer, but really trying to work to fix things for millions of people that are impacted. Mr. McClintock, I'm going to let you guys flip the coin, decide who goes first. If you please make sure you delineate which bill you're speaking about. I would assume we're first going to go to the Water Supply Permitting Coordination Act, but I'll let you guys decide between gentlemen recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The best way to describe this bill is just tell you what I learned during 4 years chairing the Water and Power Subcommittee of the Natural Resources Committee, and that is this: droughts are nature's fault; they happen, but water shortages are our fault. That's a decision that we made a generation ago when we stopped building new reservoirs to meet the needs of a growing population. We're not going to solve our water shortages until we build more reservoirs, and we can't build more reservoirs until we overhaul the laws that have made their construction endlessly time-consuming and ultimately cost-prohibitive. For years, we took testimony from frustrated water districts that were simply not able to navigate this Byzantine maze of regulations and phalanx of competing and overlapping and duplicative and often contradictory federal agencies. After years of trying to satisfy one agency, another suddenly pops up to claim jurisdiction with an entirely new set of demands in an often endless permitting process, despite the fact they're studying the same project in the same location with the same data. The burden that this places on our ability to deliver water for the next generation is crushing. Just in one example, the High Savory Dam in Wyoming took 14 years to permit. It only took 2 years to actually build. The federal government's literally studied to death 4 storage projects in California. One project, a Sites Reservoir, has had over 50 alternative locations studied, and there's no end in sight in the feasibility process on that potential reservoir. Similar delays have prevented the expansion of Shasta for 39 years. H.R. 1654 is designed to bring order from this bureaucratic chaos. It establishes a framework in which federal agencies with permitting responsibilities for the construction of new water storage projects must work together, coordinate their schedules, share data and technical materials, and make their findings publicly available. The end result would be fewer delays, more efficient use of taxpayer dollars, and ultimately more abundant water supplies. This, by the way, was the Obama administration's approach to constructing new electric transmission lines to accommodate its reliance on wind and solar generation. In October 2009, the Obama administration formed the Interagency Rapid Response Team for Transmission, which was a consortium of 9 federal agencies to coordinate a single unified environmental review document for each project analysis. It also modeled on provisions sponsored by House Democrats that expedited improvements on the Hetch Hetchy Dam, which serves the San Francisco region. So the bill simply says if there's a potential project on Interior or Agriculture Department lands, then the Bureau of Reclamation should be the coordinating agency for the permits. That is a one-stop permitting agency. It'll coordinate all reviews and analyses and opinions and statements and permits and licenses and all other federal approvals required by federal law. And it also requires transparency, assuring that all of the data that's available to the public online so that the science guiding these decisions can be rigorously scrutinized by all interested parties. It also allows water agencies to fund the review process if federal funding isn't provided, which removes one of the excuses that federal agencies have in slow walking or stalling project reviews. I want to make this point very clear. This does not bypass any environmental laws. It simply says that the process needs to be more efficient and that government agencies should talk with each other and not past each other. Nor does the bill affect the rigorous engineering process required to assure dam safety. It simply coordinates all of the existing laws. 5 years of drought in California have now concluded with the wettest winter on record. I think that's nature's way of reminding us that if we don't store water in wet years, we won't have it during dry ones, and we've just seen that the economic and social devastation that this causes can be immense. The Natural Resources Committee seeks a structured rule and asks that the text of H.R. 1654, as reported by the Committee on Natural Resources, be made in order. The committee also asks that this version of the bill be considered as read. Finally, I'd ask that you provide 1 hour debate evenly divided between the majority and minority bill managers from the Committee on Natural Resources. Thank you, and I'll be prepared to answer any questions.
Mr. McClintock, thank you very much. Ms. Lamalfa, I'm delighted that you're here. You live in a beautiful state. You're trying to do better for people, and I appreciate you being here. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for the time to appear in front of you today in consideration of 1873, and also the pleasure to appear with my Northeast California running mate on some of these same issues that we talk about all the time.
You say Northern California.
North California, yes, sir.
That's right.
Mr. Chairman, again, thank you. On this bill, it's really quite a simple concept. We have much of the generation of power in this country occurs in rural areas away from urban areas. And so long transmission lines are needed to go through those open lands, those wild lands, to get those electricity from where it's generated to where it needs to be. Many of those are going to be forested areas to move that power from it where it was generated in the newer solar arrays that might be out in the desert, hydro plants, wherever they are. Forested areas sometimes are going to be in line with that. So what the bill is seeking to do is to coordinate much more between the utilities and the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management on how the management of the trees that grow within proximity to the power lines should be handled. There's 90 million miles of electric transmission lines and 17,000 transmission and distribution facilities that exist either on Forest Service or Bureau of Land Management land. In order to maintain the transmission lines rights of way, vegetation management plans called integrated vegetative management are developed with land management agencies. These policies are developed often are contradictory from region to region, though. The current decision-making process has led to redundancy of reviews and requirements that lead to unnecessary delays in executing vegetative management practices. The consequences can be catastrophic. As mentioned earlier by the chairman, Forest Service reported 232 wildfires in 2012, 113 wildfires in 2013, caused by contact between power lines and trees that have either fallen or allowed to grow too long in proximity to them. This bill aims to leverage the ability of electric utilities to respond quickly to hazardous trees at risk of causing a forest fire or a blackout and prevent these things from happening by quick removal of an obviously suspect tree. So what we're really trying to do is prevent unnecessary blackouts that would happen in the urban areas and the blackout of the skies from the pollution coming from burning forests that burned hundreds of thousands of acres in my district and Mr. McClintock's district, and we're seeing more and more so across even the eastern part of the country here as some drought conditions are affecting them. So we have blackouts everywhere, and the black ash left behind in a ruined forest because of an unnecessary risk caused by the inability to manage a tree that would be a hazard and an obvious hazard. Utilities know this. The bill also addresses the liability concern many electric utility companies have with land management agencies as permitted under federal law. As the law currently stands, an electricity operator must seek permission and approval with the Forest Service to trim or remove a hazard tree near a right-of-way. Okay, that's fine. But if such a request is either denied or left unresolved in limbo for a long time, and the tree falls on a power line, sparking a wildfire, the owner or operator of that utility is stuck with an exorbitant fire suppression bill. One small co-op operating in La Pine, Oregon, was unjustly billed over $300,000 by the U.S. Forest Service after the request to trim a hazard tree was denied. The liability should be on those that are not getting the permitting done and not allowing the permission to take an obvious hazard tree and move it as common sense would dictate. So, Mr. Chairman, this bill originally sponsored by Representative Zinke of Montana, now our Interior Secretary, last Congress, provides electric utility companies with the tools they need to reduce the risk, unneeded risk, of forest fires, protect the habitats that are ruined by unnecessary forest fires, and improve grid reliability for those folks that depend on it, in the urban areas especially. It'll promote accountability and consistency across federal land management agencies. Groups such as the Natural Rural Electric Cooperative Association, Pacific Gas and Electric, and many others all support this legislation as a win-win. I hope to see its swift passage on the House floor. Of course, the committee would seek a structured rule that asks that the text of 1873 is reported by the Committee on Natural Resources to be made in order. The committee also asks that this version of the bill be considered as read. Finally, I ask that you provide 1 hour of debate evenly divided between the majority and minority bill managers from the Committee on Natural Resources. I'm prepared to answer any questions you would have. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Lamalfa, thank you very much. The issue of providing power, electricity, services to people in large cities is many times not understood well. We say in Texas a lot that everybody thinks that milk comes from Tom Thumbs. And Tom Thumb simply sells the milk. There are producers that produce the milk. There are cows on a farm that really provide the milk. It disturbs me when I look up and I see where people who really don't live in those areas want to tell you, where you live in the rural area, how to do your business. But they expect that switch to be on every time, or they expect that water to be available because they need it, and families that need it. So I think you guys continue to be on the front lines of trying to do the right things, and it's my hope that we can do that in this bill. I noticed that it was probably a partisan issue at the committee.
We do have bipartisan support, sir.
But we do, that was going to be my point, but I think enough people do see it. And it just really makes me happy that there are reasonable people that understand that we've got to get this done. So I appreciate your work. Mr. McClintock, I've been up to a Clear Creek Lake, something that's south and west of Shasta. And I looked up and saw Shasta.
Well, that's actually in Mr. Lamalfa's district.
that-
I've got
is that-
Yosemite Valley, I've got Lake Tahoe.
I thought it was Mike Thompson's district. I don't
It may
know.
be.
Yeah, Clear Lake, a little farther south
Part of
and
it.
west is in Mike's, yeah.
But I'll just tell you, you've got a tremendous opportunity for natural resources out there, and I think keeping the state, Texas, Oklahoma, that Chairman Cole knows this, we go through droughts about every 7 years, 7 years on, 7 years off. And the ability to capture the water, to keep it when the Lord provides the opportunity does make a difference, and increasingly it will be so. So I'm delighted that you're here today. Chairman Cole?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank both of you for bringing these bills. I think they're eminently sensible and make a great deal of sense, common sense, and will help us with two serious problems. Mr. McClintock, I do have a question, and I'm very supportive of what you're trying to do, but I had a couple of questions come to me. I just want to make sure in your effort to expedite these projects, which I agree with you need to be expedited, are there adequate provisions in your view for, and when I think of the West and I think of water, I think of conflict. There's always conflict on some of these things. And I particularly, as you know, think of tribal interests, and both of you have frankly always been in the forefront of defending Indian sovereignty. So I just want to make sure the mechanisms that you have, you know, would allow tribes to bring any concerns they might have over expedited movement in these areas.
Right, well, the tribes have a seat at the table under this bill. Section 4A of the bill directs the Bureau of Reclamation to serve as the point of contact for the tribes regarding any proposed projects. Section 4B directs the Bureau of Reclamation to coordinate with applicants, with federal and state agencies, and with tribes within 30 days of receiving any proposal under this act. And of course, it doesn't change any of the permitting laws that are provide constant input from the tribes.
I really want
It
to
simply
commend
says
you.
you got to work together here.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I want to commend, well, again, you both have always been leaders in this area, frankly, but I just wanted to make sure, and I want to commend you for actually putting them in the language of the bill, so there's no ambiguity, no no chance of mistake. So thank you very much, and look forward to supporting both your pieces of legislation. Yield back, Mr.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Judge Hasty.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes,
have no questions. I appreciate the witnesses' testimony. Thank you.
Judge, thank you very much. The gentleman, Mr. Burns.
Yes, sir. Before I say anything to the witnesses, I wonder if I may introduce somebody to the members of the committee. We have Dr. John Galilee here from Connecticut, but he grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and was not only my best friend in high school, but my roommate in college. And he wanted to see how things really happened in Congress. And I said, if you come to a Rules Committee meeting, you will see how things really work in Congress. So if you don't mind, I'd like to introduce Dr. Galilee to everybody here.
Please do.
Dr. John Galilee from Connecticut.
Thank you. So far, so good.
Well, you've hit us on a soft day. We're delighted that you're here, and I will tell you, a couple members want to spend time with you afterwards to learn more about our colleague and his activities in college. Mine are all well understood. I've run a couple times, so all my sins are out. Is that right?
I hope not, Mr. Chairman.
Well, they're all out. So anyway, I hope they are. Gentleman's recognized.
I just wanted to say to the two witnesses, I think these are, I agree with Mr. Cole, these are very commonsensical bills. Not often do we get an opportunity to vote for something that's just plain old common sense, and I appreciate the fact that both of you have worked so hard on them, and you've come forward with something we all can feel good about voting for, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. We're delighted that you're with us, Doctor. The chance for us to have our friends visit us from back home is a highlight of our time, and we're delighted that you're with us. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis. The gentleman does not seek time. The gentleman from the state of Washington who has a big interest in this is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to add my voice to the thanks to these two fine young men for bringing these bills forward. I was on the Natural Resources Committee my first term and listened to the debate on both of these, and they seem to be common sense solutions to some real problems. Being from the West, you know, in my district we've had record-setting forest fires. I can't say they're caused by the situation that you're trying to fix, Mr. LaMalfa, but certainly I know of many instances around the West where this has been a real problem, caused a lot of fires, and certainly streamlining efforts to construct reservoirs is a dire need in the western part of the United States, and anything we can do to expedite that process and still be as fair to all parties concerned, and I think that this bill accomplishes that. I just had one question I wanted to ask you, Mr. LaMalfa. One of the concerns that was raised in committee, I think, is that that this would shift liability of wildfire damage from utility companies to the taxpayer. And I'm trying to get my head around that concept. Do you have anything that you could share with me that would help explain that concern and why we shouldn't be worried about that?
Well, it's very narrow, much like the footprint of what we're talking about here through a forested area. The power lines run generally in straight lines here, so what we're talking about is that already created right-of-way when the power line was permitted and put in place. And so what we're talking about is if the permitting agency is not doing their job of reacting or responding to an obvious hazardous tree that has been brought forward and sought a NEPA permit in some cases by a utility that has, you know, been given the privilege of running through there to the service of their constituents in whether it's urban areas or along the way. They should not be liable for when they point it out. We have a tree that we need to get down, and if your permit process is going to take 6 months before we can take that tree, an obviously dead tree or leaning tree or whatever that's going to be, then should that be on the company from Lapine, Oregon, who said, guys, help us out. We need to take this material down before it causes a contact with the power line. And so, to me, right is right, and this is what it seeks to do, but only in that narrow circumstance. Other operations done by utilities that might cause a wildfire for some other reason should not be shifting that responsibility if they're being irresponsible. So what we're talking about, again, is things that should be fairly obvious that a utility has brought forward and not gotten a response, which unfortunately has been the case too many times when a federal government agency on those federal lands hasn't responded to an already permitted and installed power line system. It's just really what's right.
It seems like a common sense
Yes, sir.
solution, so, okay.
But, you know, I'm a farmer, so we look at common sense a little differently than when some other folks here, when we're talking about where things come from.
A little more
It's
common.
pretty practical, right?
A
As you
little more
are.
common in ag country. Huh?
Yeah, yeah.
I appreciate that. But, no, again, I think these are both good bills and look forward to participating in the debate tomorrow on the floor. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Mr. Newhouse, thank you very much. Gentleman from Windsor, Colorado. Gentleman, Mr. Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McClintock, I have a question for you. We have 2 water projects in Colorado that have been stalled for years. And when I say years, 14, 15 years on one, 20, 21 years on the other. And I'm not sure whether this bill takes care of it, but I sure hope that it does. The problem, as I have been told, is that a group of municipalities got together, probably 10, 12 municipalities got together. They filed an application, and they dealt with the first agency. And the first agency put a series of requirements and required a study, and they did the study, and then they amended their plan to reflect the findings in the study. And then the second agency would come along and make them start all over again. And after 2 years and $1 million of studies and effort, and a large amount of money for fairly small municipalities, they would have to start over again. And I think Bureau of Reclamation was first, and then EPA was second. And then after that, they'd go through 4 or 5 agencies, and they would start all over again with the first agency. It wasn't even like you get one shot. It wasn't one free bite. This was it almost looks to the citizens as if this is a concerted effort to prevent needed water projects from being built in areas. And what's so unfortunate is that environmental groups are getting ready now to sue after all of this has been finished to stop the project from going forward. The environmental impact is far greater if these projects aren't built, because what the municipalities will be forced to do is to buy agricultural water, dry up the farms, and use that agricultural water for municipal purposes, and the farmland is just going to be blowing all over Colorado. And so that's really the issue. And I don't know this bill well enough to know if it applies, but I sure hope it applies to that
It
situation.
is specifically written to address that situation. In the future, what will happen is the Bureau of Reclamation, when it receives an application, will call in all of the agencies that are involved in permitting. We'll call in all of the local governments, the tribal governments, and say, here is the project. Let's figure out a timetable to meet all of the permitting requirements. None of the permitting requirements has changed. The project will still have to meet all the environmental reviews, all of the engineering studies, everything that goes into siting and building a dam. But it's got to be done concurrently. You've got to share the information, and the Bureau of Reclamation will be the lead agency in coordinating all of these things so that you can't have a situation where after 20 years of study, some new agency suddenly pops up and says, wait a minute, let's start over again. That's what we're trying to address. You know, you'll see in the opposition to the bill the claim that, well, no application has ever been denied. That may be true. The problem is very, very few applications ever get approved under this endless process because it becomes so cost prohibitive and time prohibitive that the projects simply are dropped.
And municipalities run out of money, and they run out of taxpayer money. They're not running out of corporate money or private sector money. These are taxpayers that have had to put up the money for what they thought was a 4-year approval process, a 5-year approval process, and it goes on and on and on, and it's just really unfortunate. I thank you very much for bringing this. I'd love to be a co-sponsor, and I'd love to get on the Natural Resources Committee, but I'm not sure the chairman would allow that. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buck. The gentlewoman from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to remind my colleague from Colorado that the Natural Resources Committee is a very exclusive committee, difficult, but we'll see what we can do for you. I just wanted to add my comments to those of my colleagues and thank both of you for bringing these bills forward. It's a really another step in returning common sense management, particularly in the 1873, stopping the situation that we've been in before where our power supply has really been threatened by burdensome regulations that don't make any sense from federal agencies, and restoring some practicality to the system. So I just wanted to thank you both for your work on these efforts, two really important pieces of legislation, and I look forward to having the chance to speak on them on the floor tomorrow as well. I yield back. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Mr. Buck, I'd figure out if she likes flowers or chocolate, because you're in trouble down at that end. You're on your own. Yeah. Gentlemen, you have both given us not only your time and your wisdom. What happens if the person who sits in the chair of the BLM that is putting this all together disagrees and they drag their feet? Is there anything in here that moves that forward? Because I've heard we don't don't tell them what the answer is. Let the processes go on. But what happens if they don't decide to coordinate?
Well, it's Bureau of Reclamation.
Bureau of Reclamation.
Law to coordinate. If they don't, we know worse off than we were before. But they would be, in these circumstances, required by law.
Because you guys, I mean, people in the West find a way to fight about a lot of things, which comes with the territory. I get that. But at some point, common sense is the key to it. At least what you've said is you've given them a chance. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And by the way, this also has a provision that says that if the applicant wants to go the old process, they can still opt for the old process. For example, they feel they're far enough along.
One last question. How many projects do you believe this will apply to? Because it obviously takes everything that could be sitting out there today and moves it into this. Is that correct?
Well, as I said, there are 4 projects in California that have been delayed for decades because of this lack of coordination.
What I'm suggesting to you is Mr. Buck has told you he thinks there are at least 2 in Colorado. Mm-hmm. About how many? Have you looked at or scoped how many across
I have not.
the country? No. Great. Thank you very much. We're delighted that you're here. Mr. McGovern, did you have any questions that you want? Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you. We appreciate your time. If you'll please make sure that you leave for our awesome stenographer anything you brought in writing, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. There are cigars in there. And we'll get you one later, Doug. Great, thank you very much. Okay, is there anyone else that would seek to give testimony or an amendment to H.R. 1654 or H.R. 1873? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 1654 and H.R. 1873. Chair will now be receiving a motion from the young chairman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 1873, the Electricity Reliability and Forest Protection Act, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for the purposes of amendment, the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Natural Resources, now printed in the bill, and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for revision of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part A of the report. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2 of the rule provides for the consideration of H.R. 1654, the Water Supply Permitting Coordination Act, under a structured rule. The rule provides only 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and a ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources. The rule waives all points of order against the consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for the purpose of the amendment, the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on natural resources now printed in the bill and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and unopponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. Rule waives all points of order against amendments printed in Part B of the report. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
Thank you very much. You now heard the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. In summary, this is one rule, two bills. H.R. 1873 will allow a motion to recommit. H.R. 1654 will allow a motion to recommit. And we've now heard the testimony. Is there amendment or discussion to that? Seeing none, the vote now be on the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma, the young chairman, Chairman Cole. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Accordingly, the gentleman from the state of Washington, Mr. Newhouse, will handle this for Republicans. The gentleman, Mr. Polis, will be handling this for Democrats. I need to announce that our next meeting is scheduled for tomorrow. 3 o'clock, we'll be here. H.R. 2842, the Accelerating Individuals in the Workforce Act, will be the subject of the hearing. I want to thank a number of people who are visiting us today. Dr. John Galilee, thank you very much for taking time to be with us. I noticed my former legislative director, the gentleman, my lawyer, Mr. Tucker Anderson, is here. I also noticed that we have several other people who've joined us that are really my interns, and I'm delighted that they're here. One from the American University, Lauren Titus. The second, Kennedy Pasek, who is from Stanford University. And then Walker Thomas, who I noticed in the back, graduate of Ole Miss, who is here. I want to thank each of our members for taking time to be here, for these students who are taking time to not only acquaint themselves with legislative process, but Doctor, you got an opportunity to see how we make sausage today. Is there any other content from members, questions, conversation? Thank you very much. We're done with our work for the day. Yeah, that was fast.